Now, inflation and housing prices in Israel, they're rising faster than the country has seen for many years. That's all according to new official figures released just on Monday. It's a bad trend for Israel's economy. The country's consumer price index rose this year by the fastest yearly rate in 14 years, and the inflation rate is well beyond the upper range of 3% that was forecasted by the Bank of Israel. It's also a major political issue. You have to, again, draw attention to that. The rising cost of living in this country, it's a top agenda item ahead of yet another round of elections in November. According to the recent survey by the Israel Democracy Institute, 44% of Israelis said that a political party's economic platform and its plan for addressing the rising cost of living were the main factors when people go to vote. And that's November 1st. So, of course, we'll have a lot to say about that from now till then. To get into the issues, though, and help us better understand just what is happening around us in this country, we're joined in the studio today by Debbie Battat, a lecturer at the New Venture Creation at Shankar College and a founder and entrepreneur. Thanks for joining us, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I don't know where to start first. Which sort of sector of the economy to point to is the most alarming? A lot's been made out of housing prices in the country right now. A lot of attention on that. You were approaching something like 18% almost of a housing price increase in just a short period of time. The prices are soaring, and all despite the interest rates that have been raised as well. So it doesn't appear there's any slowdown to that sector. How do you look at the housing market in the country?
Well, what's happening now in the housing market is actually a result of what's been going on over the last 18 months and 2 years, some of which actually was quite positive. And it has to do with, of course, supply and demand. So let's look at that a little bit closer. Last year, 2021, we had a booming market. There were a lot of IPOs. The high-tech industry supplied a lot of jobs that were highly skilled. And those people had an expendable income. They then want to live in a highly dense area, and they're ready to buy a home. So that's the first thing. On the demand side, we have another factor that happened maybe 18 months ago after the shock of COVID, is that the interest rates decreased. There was a reduction on purchase tax, so that increased the level of demand. Now, on the supply side, we all know that Israel is a small, dense market, and there are a couple cultural factors that I think are quite unique to Israel. So let's look at that for a moment. Number one, we have a lot of homeowners, but actually those homes stay in families for generations. So they're passed on family to family.
It makes sense just intuitively. We all, I think, know a lot of people like that, the houses come down the generations, from grandparents down to the grandkids. So that's a theme that plays out a lot. We see that. Yeah.
Exactly. But another piece that I think is unique to Israel is it's a cultural factor about where people want to live. Now, in the U.S., people will live where there are jobs, even if it means that they're very far from their families. Here, people want to be close to their families, and even if we drive that industry and those jobs to other areas, by the way, in the South, the housing market was not increasing as much, almost very little. So
it's a nice part of the country, the family closeness. We don't want to ruin that, but is it a crisis here? Or less so? Given the high percentage of ownership in this country, not so much a crisis? A lot of people are actually happy about these soaring prices? We don't go that far. Okay.
I would say nobody's happy except for the developers themselves.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a crisis. I would call it rather a concerning situation. And I think the reason is that we have other economic indicators that are actually quite strong. We've had, I think in July, we had 3.3% unemployment rate, which is less than it was in June.
Yeah. How is the economy? We're looking at other OECD countries. I know this is sort of a world theme right now. Recessions, and certainly in the U.S., inflation so in focus. How does Israel stack up? This sort of cost of living has always been a sensitive issue here. This place feels very expensive. It has been very expensive for many years. But is it not as bad, actually, as many other places?
It is expensive. It is expensive compared to other countries. Okay. But, in fact, if we just look at the inflation rate and indicators such as the unemployment rate, actually Israel is faring much better than the OECD countries.
Good to hear.
Wow, we had 9.6% just recently announced in May, and it was upward of 10%. A lot of that coming from food and energy, mostly energy increases. And our unemployment rate, as we said before, quite low here, and over 5% in OECD countries. So we're really quite okay. Productivity and exports are also good in comparison. But as you said,
the GDP as well. I think some of the latest reports, or the last quarter even, that GDP is going in a good direction in this country as well? Or?
Well, it's, again, we're looking at a worldwide phenomenon right now, and everything is connected. So we are compared to OECD countries doing quite okay.
All right,
It needs to get better.
Our price is still expected to climb. I mean, looking at the consumer price index, the thing that sort of hits our wallets each month here, whether it's at the grocery store, the price of gasoline, I mean, are things still set to rise for a while? What's the forecast, if there is one?
Well, I think we need to separate the consumer price index and housing, because those are a little bit different.
Yeah.
Now, as far as housing goes, I think that that's going to continue to rise, sadly, just because we've been saying for months, if not years, that it's going to stabilize, and it hasn't. Consumer price index, a lot of it has to do with the price of imports. We have now the Russia-Ukraine war, which is allegedly affecting fuel prices that affect the raw materials coming in as well. So I think for the moment, even though we're hopeful before an election, I don't think that we can expect to see any big decrease.
No changes
coming months.
Coming around the corner. Certainly, I guess this will maintain itself at the top of the priority list for voters this fall. So I guess we'll start to see the political parties rallying around the issue in various ways in the coming months. For now, Debbie Battat, thanks for being with us too.
Thank you so much.